Okay, last time we were together, we left off talking about the founding of Jamestown. 13th of May in 1607, it is the oldest English settlement, permanent English settlement in North America. We talked about some of the trials, tribulations that the Jamestowners endured. In fact, during the first year, almost all of them perished. I think there were only 38 that actually survived there. Fortunately, Captain John White was able to, Captain John Smith, was able to bring law and order and organization to this area. Always problems, for the next 40 years. We would have wave after wave of English people that would come into there. All right, so anyway, let's move on into our document camera. And here I've put Jamestown here for you so you can kind of keep it organized. I recommend that you take notes on all of this. And anyway, the principal crop that we're going to find in the Jamestown community was that of tobacco. Tobacco is very labor intensive, requires a lot of territory. It depletes the soil very quickly here. One of the people that's so closely associated with the tobacco industry in the Jamestown area and Virginia area is that of John Rolfe. I need you to recognize this name, John Rolfe. Let me get it down here so you can actually look at that too. Now, another thing in the Jamestown community, what they established there, which was actually done by the Virginia Company, formerly the London Company, was to create a headright system. Now, bear with me on this. It's not really that difficult to understand. But under the headright system, if you were a resident in the Jamestown area, you would be given 50 acres of land. You're given that, by the Virginia Company. If you had a wife, your wife got 50 acres likewise, too. So anybody that was coming into the Jamestown area received this headright system here, where you could grow tobacco, preferably, or maybe even some of the other crops, too. If you were kind of a wealthy individual and willing to pay the ship passage for another individual, you got their headright system. You got their headright, which meant you got an additional 50 acres with that. So it was a rather good business, a rather good incentive to come there. And for the Virginia Company, they continued to bring in skilled workers, like iron workers, gold artisans. Where they're going to get the gold, I have no idea. Perfume makers, wine makers, glass blowers. When you go there today, you'll still see reenactors that are making blown glass and that sort of thing. 120 pounds of tobacco, you could purchase a female. You could purchase a wife with that, which I don't know. I'd have to do quite a bit of thinking about that. All right, so anyway, one thing I need you to remember here as we move on here, and on the 30th of July in 1619, the first assembly of an elected legislature in what would later be the United States assembled in Jamestown. It was referred to as the House of Burgesses. I want you to recognize that now. The House of Burgesses, I don't care that you know the date, 30th of July, 1619, but this was the first assembly of an elected legislature that would form in the United States, and later in the United States, which we don't have in the United States right now. All right, so anyway, here's the date for you if you care to write that down, but I'm not going to hold you responsible for it. Now, John Rolfe, one of the prominent individuals in the Jamestown community, kept a diary. And in August of 1619, he made an annotation that 20 Negroes, 20 African Americans, I should say 20 Africans, were brought into the Jamestown area. Historians argue today, were they slaves, were they servants? And I can't really give you an answer on that, too. But nevertheless, they were brought in. That's our first documentation here. According to John Rolfe, anyway. I cannot prove this, but legend tells us, some historians will tell you, that the first child born of African parents in North America, was, I can't remember his first name, was Tucker. Was his last name here, I'm sorry, William Tucker. Named for his owner. That's what they say about that. And I'm sorry about botching that a little bit. Virginia Dare, of course, was the first child born of English parents in North America. All right, let's move on here. Now, always problems with the Powhatan Indians, Powhatan Indians here. Some people call them the Rappahannock Indians. And in fact, at one point, the daughter of Powhatan was captured by the Jamestowers, and she was ransomed. Her name, as you well know, was Pocahontas. All right, I'm going to flip back away from my documents camera, flip back towards me. And here's a likeness here. I cannot place this under the document camera. So this was a likeness here of Pocahontas. Doesn't look very Indian-like, and of course she was Native American. But the Jamestowners ransomed her, and when they did ransom her, put this back up, when they ransomed her, they Powhatan Indians wouldn't pay the ransom, so she remained with the Jamestowners. She stayed with the Jamestowners and ended up marrying John Rolfe. And contrary to what the Disney productions tell you that she married Captain John Smith, she did not. She married John Rolfe. She adopted Christianity. She took the name of Rebecca. What you were seeing in the likeness a second ago, she's dressed in European-style clothes, and eventually went to London, and I went to England, and I contracted, unfortunately, pneumonia, and she died there. And that's where she lies and rests today, although the church that she was entombed in did burn. So, whatever the case. All right, so let's go back to our notes right here. We had Pocahontas. Now, for Powhatan was a ruthless individual, leader of the Powhatan Indians, but he died in 1619, and he was followed by his older brother. Now, you'll have fun trying to spell this properly, and you'll have fun trying to pronounce this. Best pronunciation I can come up with, which I've used for well over 20 years, is Opechancanough. I'll say it again for you, Opechancanough, the older brother to Powhatan, and he was just as ruthless as Powhatan. All right, and in fact, at one time, and this took place on a Good Friday in March of 1622, Opechancanough, pretending to barter trade with the Powhatan Indians and with the Jamestowners, and the Jamestowners very foolishly allowed the Native Americans to come inside the fortified walls of Jamestown, and Opechancanough and his Indian allies ended up killing 347 colonists, including John Rolfe. Whoa, that was a real tragedy here. Well, you know how human nature is. We have a tendency to forget things here. So by the following year, in 1623, everything had been forgotten. So the Jamestawners once again invited the Powhatan Indians to come into the Jamestown community, where they promptly poisoned 200 Indians. All in a day in the life here in the cities of Jamestown and Virginia. All right, so anyway, let's move on. All right, so we've established so far one colony, and that colony is Virginia. We have 12 more colonies to go, and we won't make it there today. But let's move on with another individual here. And this man never set foot in North America, and his name was George Calvert. Now, George Calvert was a devout Catholic. People referred to him as Lord Baltimore, or sometimes you'll see it written as First Lord Baltimore. And he had a vision in which he would establish a colony which would be a refuge for Catholics in the New World. And he approached the king, and the king gave a tentative approval. But then George Calvert unfortunately died, and he'll be followed by his son, which is Cecil Calvert. And if you're following in your textbook, I think you'll find a likeness there of a young Cecil Calvert holding up a map of the world, or a map of the New World, in your textbook there. Sometimes Cecil Calvert is referred to as the second Lord Baltimore. And he wanted to carry out his father's wishes, so he continued with the charter there, to establish a colony in the New World. And he recruited his brother, Leonard Calvert. I think you're seeing a trend here, the Calverts here, and to lead the expedition. And lead this expedition in 1632, sailing to the New World. We don't know exactly how many people were on that expedition here. Perhaps 300, maybe it was more likely 200. All right, and when they sailed across the ocean, 1632, here we go, let me get this turned properly here, and sailing in two ships, as a matter of fact. One ship was known as the Ark, one ship was known as the Dove. In fact, let me show you a recreation of the Maryland Dove. This is what it looks like today, and it is present there in the area I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. And it's my understanding that you can actually take a voyage on this too, But anyway, and so the community that they established, they gave it the name St. Mary's. All right, St. Mary's. So this is St. Mary's, and we carry it a little bit further. This is Maryland, Maryland. And so that's going to give us the second colony that we have here. Now, today, if you wish to visit St. Mary's, it's a nice community. It's kind of off the beaten path here. I don't know why I'm getting such a terrible glare with that. But historic St. Mary's City, you can go there today. As you travel through there, driving from Annapolis anyway, you'll go through Leonardtown, you'll go through Calvert County, and finally you end up there in St. Mary's. Kind of like Jamestown, in a way, a reproduce, or I should say a replica city there. They will charge you for that. There's, $10, $15 ticket fee to go in there. And it's kind of interesting, it honestly is, while you're there, be sure to visit St. Mary's College, too. All right, so anyway, Now let's move. Let me kind of tie this up here on Maryland. That gives us our second colony here. The conditions in Maryland weren't near as harsh as that of Jamestown and Virginia. The Indians had been suppressed there. The Indians had been suffered from diseases and from wars, and they just did not serve as a threat. Nor did we have the diseases like malaria that you had that was so prevalent there in Jamestown. They also had a headright system that was a little bit better than that in Jamestown by the Virginia Company, and this provided 100 acres for each husband, wife, and 50 acres for each child. So that was pretty good. All right, now I'll tell you about another event. Let's go back to the Jamestown area. You'll find this in your textbook. And it deals with an individual by the name of William Berkeley, Sir William Berkeley. And in 1642, he was appointed governor of Virginia by King Charles I. And at first he was very popular. He was a young man, quite popular. He allowed the people from Virginia to spread to the Blue Ridge Mountains and actually go beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then suddenly established rules that said no longer could you do that. No longer could you travel beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains. And the reason for this is that he had worked out a deal with the Powhatan Indians, with Opec and Kano, is that if the governor would limit westward expansion, then the Indians would not bother the people in the Virginia area here. And so anyway, it kind of lost a little bit of popularity after that. Well, let's go back to my documents camera here. And shortly after this, anyway, in 1673, a young man, a man by the name of Nathaniel Bacon, arrived in the Jamestown area. This was a man that was young, he was educated, he'd been educated at Cambridge in England. He was a member of what they called the gentry class. You've inherited enough money from your father that you do not have to work here. And being an educated man, he was quite popular. He was popular with Berkeley at first, but he didn't stay in Jamestown. He moved into what was called the back country, where he was quite popular with just the country folks that were present there. So anyway, 2 years later, a group of Indians, and these Indians were known as the Doeg Indians. I don't care that you know that. If you want to spell it, though, it was D-O-E-G, raided a plantation and they killed a white servant. Well, the backcountry people, in turn, retaliated against the Indians, and they were led by Nathaniel Bacon. And as it turned out, sure enough, they did happen upon some of the sleeping Doeg Indians, and they took the lives of those Native Americans. But by mistake, they also raided another tribe of the very, very strong and much more powerful Susquehannock Indians. And so the Susquehannock Indians, which were really innocent, took revenge upon the Jamestowners, or upon the backcountry people outside of Jamestown. And of course, this creates an Indian war. So Berkeley was trying to protect his interests at the Blue Ridge Mountain, and the reason for this is that the Native Americans were providing him with under-the-table furs to keep him from allowing people to travel beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains. So nevertheless, Nathaniel Bacon organized this army of backcountry people, and Berkeley, in the meantime, declared Bacon's rebellion here as a treasonous behavior. And so Nathaniel Bacon marched his army into Jamestown, burned the city to the ground there, put the governor, William Berkeley, to flight, and was on the verge here of completely overtaking Virginia itself. And strangely enough, Nathaniel Bacon contracted dysentery, and the young man died. And it restored everything back to normal with that. Now, this is referred to as Bacon's Rebellion. I want you to remember this. Bacon's Rebellion. It was the largest insurrection in colonial history until the time of the American Revolution. It was the largest rebellion in colonial history until the time of the American Revolution. It was referred to as Bacon's Rebellion. All right, shall we move on here? Now, we've been talking about some of the colonies, Maryland, also talked about Virginia, but the principal focus for these European countries was the Caribbean islands. Most people don't recognize that. Remember the principle we talked about with mercantilism. You know, the nation is the principal benefactor. So the primary focus here was on the Caribbean islands to establish sugar plantations, coffee plantations, that sort of thing. So I want to share with you a map here showing you the Caribbean islands. And do I have it right? Nope, I had it backwards. So some of you may have traveled here before, but this goes back to the topic we were talking about before, where we had the slave trade. And when slaves were taken from Africa, at first it was by Portuguese, later by Spanish, later by the French and the English, and by the Dutch too. But the principal focus was bringing slaves over to, not into North America, but down into South America and the Spanish held territories. And most people don't recognize this, but out of the 11 million slaves that were taken from Africa, 95% did not come to North America, where the United States is present today. 65% of the slaves went to the Brazilian colonies and Spanish colonies, 35% went to the French colonies and the English colonies, and only 5% came to North America. That's not what your teachers have told you, unfortunately, where you were taught, I was taught, that 100% of the African slaves were carried to places such as South Carolina and Georgia. That's just not the case. But anyway, and if we break this down, and if you cruise in these areas, and I always encourage you to do so, you'll find many of these islands here. I'm reading upside down, so I can't see it very well here. The Dutch islands here of Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, all very nice places here to visit here. If we look at other areas here, and I'll try to identify some of these for you here. Down here, Tobago and Trinidad. These were Spanish colonies at first. Grenada here, which was a French colony later, a English colony. Barbados is a English colony. English is spoken there today. St. Lucia was a French colony. Martinique here, French colony. Guadeloupe here, French colony. If you go to those places today, French is the language that you'll hear spoken. Dominica, which was English colony. St. Kitts and Nevis, which is an English colony here. English is spoken there. Antigua, where is Antigua here? Right here. That was also an English colony. We move right on over here. Where am I here? Puerto Rico was Spanish. Here we have with the what we call Dominican Republic today, which was Spanish. Haiti, it's off the map. Let me flip my book over right here and we'll pick it up from the other side here. And let me try to get it position right, and I cannot. You can just see the end of it right here. Haiti, or Haiti, which is French colony. That's French is spoken there today. Jamaica was Spanish. It was later taken by the English, and English is a language you hear spoken there today. Up to the north, we have Cuba, which is present here, which was a Spanish colony here. And incidentally, I didn't hand this out the other day to show you. Let's move it up a little bit further here. Now, where Miami would be located, do we have it on the map over here? All right, Miami is present right here. Now, here are the Bahamas. Perhaps you've traveled there before. And where Watling Island, San Salvador is, where Christopher Columbus landed, was right here. Ordinarily, if you're taking a cruise here to St. Thomas, you'll pass down just like this, and you'll go very close to where San Salvador or Watling Island is present. All right, so anyway, now the number one cash crop in that area was that of sugar cane, and very labor intensive. And at first, Europeans from England primarily were used as a labor source, but these are tropical environments, semi-tropical environments, and it was very harsh conditions, and the Europeans just couldn't stand up to the labor. And so a substitute for that, for the European workers, were African workers, African slaves. And soon many Africans African heritage were brought to these Caribbean islands, and in fact their numbers outnumbered that of the whites that were present there before the war. Today, when you travel to almost any of those islands that I just pointed out to you a few minutes ago, if you go to any of those islands, if you're on a cruise ship and you get off the cruise ship, the only white people that you'll see are those people that were from the cruise ship, and a few African Americans there. But 99.5% of the populations in places like Barbados, Grenada, they're all of African descent there too. And that's kind of interesting. You don't believe me, you take a cruise and you go down to that area. All right, so let's move back into our notes here. And I'm going to shift the subject here, folks, and get away from Bacon's Rebellion. You need to recognize Bacon's Rebellion. You'll see that again in the future. All right, now, in England, in 1608, a group of separatists, and the separatists are Puritans, they're not a part of the Church of England, but a group of separatists were concerned that their religion was being tainted, so to speak. And so, nevertheless, they secretly left England, and they went across the more or less the English Channel and went over to the Netherlands. And there they established a community in the Netherlands, which they gave it the name Leiden. You can go there today if you wish to do so. You can see two different spellings there, and if you're in the Netherlands, it's spelled Leiden. and spelling it in English, it's L-E-Y, whatever the case is. And there they remained all the way up until 1620. This was against the king's orders too. But what they realized is while they were in Leiden, that their children were being assimilated into the Dutch population, and that wasn't good. So they ended up returning to England, and when they returned to England, they gained permission from the London Company to establish another colony, and this colony which would be present in the New World. So they ended up departing out of an area of England, and why don't you think, if you're looking at England on a map, or imagine that in your head anyway, on the south part and the western part. And they left an area which is called Plymouth. And notice the spelling there, P-L-I. Sometimes we spell it with P-L-Y. And they left on 6th of September, 1620. There's more to this story, but I'm only going to tell you just a little bit of it anyway. And the ship that they sailed upon was a ship which was known as the Mayflower. Now, this is not the actual Mayflower. This is a creation, or a replica of the ship, which is called the Mayflower too. And you can pay a little bit of money and you can go on the Mayflower too if you wish to do so. Wander around there all day if you wish to. I'll tell you where it is in just a few minutes. So that was the Mayflower. And they set sail, and they had with them 35 saints. It's a little bit difficult to understand. These are people that have undergone complete conversion in the Separatist church and the Puritan church. And they had 67 strangers. And these are people that are still not 100% religious yet. And they set sail, notice the date here, on the 6th of September. So when they cross the Atlantic Ocean, it's going to be pretty good weather conditions as they cross the Atlantic Ocean. All right, but nevertheless, they were blown off course or misnavigated or whatever. And they were supposed to land in the area controlled by the Virginia Company, but they went to the north. And instead of landing in Virginia, they actually came across the coastline here of what we presently call Massachusetts. All right, so let's take a look at this. Now, if you're not familiar with this, this is Cape Cod. This is Cape Cod. Here's Cape Cod Bay. Most beautiful area, by the way. And where they spotted land, they were on about the 9th and 11th here of November, and they were somewhere around here, and they realized they were off course here. So they sailed around, and they went up to the very southern tip here, which is, and they gave it the name Provincetown, by the way, and that's where they went ashore there. All right, let me show you what it looks like today. There's nothing there that remains of these pilgrims, these Puritans, except a monument here, and this monument said this is where they stayed. Stayed there for 40 days, I believe it was anyway. And they realized, we're just out here in nowhere. The conditions here are extremely harsh. So after 40 days, they got back on the Mayflower and they crossed here, went across like that, and spotted land here, and this is where they went ashore. All right, they gave it the name Plymouth here. All right, anyway, let me get my map out of the way and we'll get back to our notes here. And Provincetown. Now, they left Provincetown, landed at Plymouth here. If you look on my notes here, it says Plymouth, December the 21st, 1620. Here, 1620. I'm sure you recognize this. This is Plymouth Rock. If you had to guess a size on it, I'm going to convert it back to me here. If you had to guess a size on it, it's probably, you can't even see my other hand, about this wide here, about this thick here, and about this wide. So anyway, you kind of get an idea. It's a pretty big stone there. Now, if you look carefully at it here, if I can get it focused right, if you look carefully at it, there's a crack in it. Look over on this side here, and you can see a crack. During the American Revolution, this is one of our treasures. During the American Revolution, we were afraid that the British were going to try to take this relic, this historical relic, and some of the areas in the Plymouth, some of the people in the Plymouth area tried to remove it and hide it, and as they were removing it, they dropped it and it broke, and so it's been cemented back together. All right, but anyway, that's where they established their community there. Notice the date there that they went ashore here, December the 21st, 1620. I don't know if you're familiar with the Massachusetts winter, but in Massachusetts during the winter you don't grow crops. So it's a tough time to actually land there. They knew they were off course, and so what the elders did, they gathered and they formed a Mayflower Compact and swore allegiance to the king and declared themselves as a separate entity there. Now, All right. Fortunately, they were able to befriend a couple of Native Americans, and Squanto, Samoset. Squanto had actually spent some time in England and spoke English, and these were city people. They didn't know anything about hunting or fishing or farming, and through the efforts there of Squanto and Samoset, they showed the farmers, or showed these Puritans here, these, what some people call pilgrims, and showed them proper ways in which to plant their crops, fertilize their crops, introduced them to the Indian chief there of the Wampanoag Indians, whose name was Massasoit, and they developed a pretty good relationship with Massasoit. All right, let's see what else I need to mention to you here about this. The person that was the military officer for these Puritans was Miles Standish. Perhaps you've read the poem there, The Courtship of Miles Standish. The person that was the man that was elected governor time and time over in the Plymouth plantation was that of William Bradford. Now, let me show you a few photographs here. I'm going to get this out of the way here. And I want to show you a few photographs that perhaps will whet your appetite with this. If you visit Plymouth today, here's a pavilion and showing you where Plymouth Rock is housed. Now, where Plymouth Rock is kept, it's down here. All right, this is free. It's open to the public. You walk above, and you actually look down on Plymouth Rock, and they'll have a custodian there that will be raking the sand, making it all real nice like. Now, some other noteworthy things that you'll see in Plymouth. A lot of history here. If I can get the glare off of this, we have Massasoit, which is here. William Bradford, statue of William Bradford, and then I don't know. That's just some kind of Liberty type statue present there. All right, if the street in which they established their settlement on, they gave it the name Leyden Street. You can actually, these are not original homes for the Puritans anyway, but that's where their homes were, and they named that street Leyden Street. At the top of the hill, there's a church. It is open to the public, and if you go behind the church and up the hill, you can find the cemetery there. You locate the cemetery at this around here that holds the remains of many of these Puritans, these pilgrims that actually perished, in the next year or two. William Bradford supposedly is buried in this site. I would say he's buried in the cemetery, but probably not directly on that site. So anyway, it's kind of a fun place to visit there. I would recommend to you good folks, don't take the time to go over to Plymouth Plantation. This is located about 3 miles from where actually Old Plymouth is present. The Old Plymouth is free to the public. You don't have to pay anything. If you go to the Reconstruction Village there, they're going to charge you $10 or $15 to go through it. And it's not the real thing. All right. So anyway, so let's move away from that group, and we're going to find a few years after this here another group. And this was the largest group of immigrants that would come to North America during this period of time. And in fact, it was the largest group in this century. Now, they're going to arrive in 1630. They were present on 17 ships, had 1,000 passengers. And where they arrived, let me get my map back up here. All right. And let's get it back over here, such as this. All right. And let's position it a little bit better here. And I'm having difficulty doing that. And where they arrived, they came up into this area right here. Now, this was a group that they referred to themselves as the Massachusetts Bay Company. So this area we're talking about is known as Massachusetts, and it will give us our third colony. We have Virginia, Maryland, and now we have Massachusetts. And what this group will do, and I tried to point it out, and I'll move my map in a minute, they had their headquarters at Boston, and instead of having 1,000 people to stay in Boston itself, they established a number of other communities around Boston. My eyes are too poor to read these, and you probably can't either. But we had areas such as Concord, which would be out here. We had areas Sudbury, Ipswich, Waterbury, and just many, many communities that were all established around this hub here, which is called Boston. Now, in this area, there was no separation of church and state. The church was a state. The state was a church. It was a very, very religious group. Often you'd find that the mayor of the town would be the principal religious leader within the town. And the person that was elected governor of this group, the Massachusetts Bay Company, John Winthrop. All right. And I tried to illustrate it here for you, like you would have Boston, and you had various other communities that were established around there. Okay. Now, as I said earlier, tightly religious group. They were very fearful of any outside force coming into the community. In other words, you don't want any Catholics in the community, nobody of the Jewish faith here, and just keep the community very, very tight within itself. One individual in the area by the name of John Cotton believed that the church members should be able to regulate their own affairs and choose their own ministers, and he broke away and established a congregational church here. Another individual in 1635 who was a minister in Newtown. Newtown's a city which is right outside where Boston is present there, 1635, was unhappy with the religious sects that were present there in Boston area, so he took his congregation away and went down to the area around New Haven and established a new community which is called Connecticut. All right, so anyway, we have Windsor, New Haven, and so forth. But anyway, that gives us another community, and that is that of Connecticut. All right, now, in addition to that, we had another individual, and this person's name was Roger Williams. Now, Roger Williams was a religious leader, a very, very controversial religious leader in Salem, Massachusetts. We'll talk about Salem at a later time here. And Roger Williams led his congregation away and went down to an area in which he had personally purchased from the Narragansett Indians. He had purchased this area, this territory, about 10 years earlier. Now, this is 1644, what we're talking about now. And he named that area Rhode Island, which is named for the island of Rhodes. It is today our smallest state. This will give us our fifth colony. And the principal city was that of Providence. All right, now today, and by the way, you may visit Providence today. You can find where the old community was located that Roger Williams established. And Roger Williams established a new faith, a new religion, which was a spin-off of the Puritan religion, which is called the Baptist faith. All right, I want to share a few things with you here, and this is kind of interesting here. Roger Williams established the first Baptist church in America, and here it is. This is the very first Baptist church in America. Not the first Baptist church, it is the first Baptist church in America. It's a beautiful church. You can go into the sanctuary, it's free of charge. Roger Williams established this. Here's a brochure showing you the First Baptist Church in Providence, Rhode Island. Right up the hill, by the way, is Brown University. Here's a church bulletin that came from the church. I stole this from the church. And if you travel just a couple of blocks away, overlooking the city of Providence, Rhode Island, you can see the statue here of Roger Williams with his hands out, I guess, in salvation here. Like I said, Brown University is about two blocks behind us. So anyway, that's kind of interesting there with Roger Williams. All right, let's see what else we have, because I'm running out of time. I want to wrap this up. There were several Indian wars that took place, and one of these wars in 1637 was the Pequot War. The Pequots were a group of Indians, and they came into a clash with some of these English settlers in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Look at your textbook map, and it will give you a description there of the Pequot War. Another war, Indian War, that took place in 1675. It was called King Philip's War. King Philip is not a king, nor is his name Philip. His name is Matacamet. Did I write that for you folks? I did. His name was Matacamet, and he was a Wampanoag Indian, and actually was a son, one of the three sons of Massasoit. And it was a 3-year war, and it just ravaged the white population, the English population present in that area. Finally, Matacamet, here's what he looked like here. Matacamet was tracked down. Actually, what happened here, the Native Americans, the Wampanoag Indians, just ran out of ammunition and gunpowder. And he was tracked down, and his body was quartered, if you understand what I'm talking about. His head was removed, and head supposedly taken back to Plymouth, Massachusetts, placed on a pole where it was displayed for the next 20-25 years, such as that. All right, so anyway, that's our today's lecture here, folks. We covered a lot of material. When we return for our next time together, we'll be referring to the English Civil War. English Civil War, Roundheads, the Cavaliers, and it was just a real bruising affair there. You'll get very familiar with individuals such as Oliver Cromwell. All righty, thank you for your attendance here today. Don't forget, you have your examination, your quiz coming up. You have your supplemental readings. You have your videos to take a look at. So a lot of work here, folks. All right, thank you very much.